honestly, I guess it kind of leads into a question I think we were, I guess, chatting about here behind the scenes. But another guy super talented. In the other case, like Jackson Holliday, super talented when you watch him. Got a lot of money, first overall pick, way different expectation. But Kev, I think you had a question because it kind of alluded to with Jackson and Mateo, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, there was, talk about Orioles Twitter, the Jackson Holiday
situation. That was talked about, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just once or twice.
Yeah.
Once or twice.
Just a couple times. But he comes up, he struggles, he gets sent back down. And then everybody's like, well, who's the second baseman going to be? Who's it going to? And Jorge Mateo stepped up. And he's like, oh, you can call him the pretty much everyday second baseman now.
Think so?
For me, it's like, well, when are they going to call Jackson up? And what did you think originally about what the timing of everything when they called him up and originally not having him on the roster and how that whole situation
wasn't surprised he wasn't on the roster. I was surprised when they called him up. I was surprised. I thought they would wait a little while longer. But now I feel they're in a good spot. They're in no rush to get Jackson back here. Right. I love Jorge Mateo. Now, whether he's in a super utility role because he can play short, he can play the outfield, and just Jorge Mateo off the bench. I knew as soon as spring training began, Jorge Mateo, and he had a good spring, wouldn't have to hit a ton to make the team just because there's very few guys in the game who can do what he does, both defensively and obviously what he does on the base paths. And that's a huge factor in close baseball games. I still love that ability. But now he is hitting, and he's hitting right on right a lot, or at least a lot better. And I just don't feel there's a rush to get Jackson here in the near future. I haven't checked in the numbers in the last few days. I know he was hitting better. I was talking to Kyle Stowers about this. He was surprised that he just didn't hit because that's what he's seen. That's what he's known.
Yeah.
That said, I'm never surprised when people get here and struggle. I'm over being surprised. And I grew up in an era where the Orioles had a lot of highly touted prospects and almost none of them made it. And certainly almost all of them performed under expectations. And there's a lot of things, I think, going back to the 90s and early 2000s that were kind of cultural within the organization about that. But I always think about Nick Markakis, who's one of my favorite all-time Orioles, as he was the first one in a long line of guys who'd actually were hyped up and actually figured it out. But if you remember, Nick's first 2+ months in the big leagues were awful. Yeah. They were this close to sending him back down. And then he started hitting and never looked back. But I'm never surprised anymore, whether it's Grayson Rodriguez or Jackson Holliday or Gunnar at the beginning. Adley got off to a tough start. That guy struggled. In fact, I'm surprised when they don't struggle at this point.
I was going to say, we talked to Mike Elias about Holliday, and this was before you got called up. And what Mike was saying was like, when you have a phenom like that and they only know winning and they only know success, he's like, I actually enjoy seeing the adversity and seeing how they handle that. So you almost have to wonder, and I don't know if this is,
he's never failed before.
I'm just speculating, right? So I'm almost wondering if he was brought up to fail, and then they send him back down, and then he kind of processes that, and that's how you develop a player.
I think it's so funny when the one thing about certain Twitter perspectives, I don't even know why. I mean, you're allowed to have an opinion, but when people thought there was some deeper alternative motive, I even saw this though. Forget about fans on Twitter from National Baseball people.
Yeah,
like have they not watched the game for the last 100+ years? That young players, and here's Jackson Holliday, who just had really a cup of coffee in AAA. He's so young. He still can fill out a lot, that there's some sort of alternative motive to give him more ABs in AAA. That, to me, was the crazy opinion.
Yeah.
And I understand we're in an era right now where these guys are so hyped up, and it's always the next best thing, always the next best thing. I'm like, well, the guys they have here, they're pretty good. You really want to be an organization that doesn't feel they have to rush prospects. That's when you really got a good organization.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is with Jackson, and I'll close that out. We'll get some fun things to get you out of here, Brett, is that with Jackson, with a lot of people, when I try to explain, this was the one time actually with Elias, I think it was and he is so good with forecasts and looking at all the variants. I think it was one of the first times where he went, gut, screw it, I'm going to go with it because I think there's that urge that's showing me he can do it, but everything else was telling him no at the time. And he's such a guy that is forecasted by, and I do think that that's what happened with Jackson. He was playing well, the impulses bring him up, but deep down, I think that he was like, you know what? And that's just Elias is a really good guy, especially when people look at this in the business side. They go, oh, they don't care about the guys. He cares about the guys. And I do think he thinks back like, man, did I put Jackson in a position that he might have not been fully ready for? Now, I would have loved to see Jackson for 2 more weeks if he's already up there, hit 9th, whatever happens. But I don't blame it because you're trying to do the best thing in the interest of the
you don't want
player.
to bury him. You don't want to
bury him. And that's the hard thing. But also, if that ball that hits off Matt Moore against the Angels goes 2 feet to the left and not to the second baseman, Jackson Holliday now has his first 2-hit game in the big leagues. And then you send him back down. Well, then
that's like the game that we were at where we had the warehouse dog.
Yeah.
That was a Michael Elias day. We had that interview.
Yeah.
Jackson, I don't know, was probably about 10 feet from hitting a home run right out in the center.
Warning track.
I mean, so he had some hard hit balls. It was just a lot of them didn't hit green grass.
Yeah.
He walked and scored a run
too, right? The defense was getting better too. I mean, he was showing strides.
Well, and every time he stood up or he hit, there were standing ovations. It felt like each time, there was a camera in his face constantly, and every time he failed, everyone wanted the world to know that he wasn't playing well. That's a lot, even if you're the number 1 overall pick. So again, he's a professional. It's not making any excuses. You got to go out there and play. But context of it, baseball players, I'm glad you mentioned it, Brett. It's a shock now if young, talented players aren't going to